This video is to bring to your attention about what is going on around the world when it comes to a food crisis that is happening right now in 2022 between the war of Ukraine and Russia, who supplies sunflower oil, sunflower seeds, foil paper, fertilizer, corn, wheat. All of this will affect everyone in the USA and in Europe. And then there's global warming around the world that's causing catastrophic effects everywhere.
Russia's coal and fertilizer king Andrei Melnichenko became the latest high-profile businessman to call for an end to the conflict in Ukraine on Monday, as he warned of an impending global food crisis if fighting continues. The 50-year-old founder of Russia's largest ammonium nitrate producer called the conflict truly tragic and says he feels great pain and disbelief watching the crisis unfold. Melnichenko said a supply chain already disrupted by the global health crisis was now even more distressed, and some farmers are already unable to afford fertilizer. He said it may also lead to food shortages in the world's poorest countries. President Vladimir Putin warned last Thursday that food prices would rise globally due to soaring fertilizer costs. Russia accounts for 13% of the world's fertilizer output. Several of Russia's richest businessmen have publicly called for peace since fighting began last month, including Mikhail Friedman and Oleg Deripaska. Melnichenko was sanctioned by the European Union last week, and his $578 million yacht was seized by police. His spokesperson said he has no relation to the tragic events in Ukraine and added he has no political affiliations.
It is time for us to think smart about what we're doing. This is part 1 of 2 series of OPP. Observe, prepare, and protect. My question to you is, are you ready? Are you observing what is going on in the world? Are you preparing today for what could possibly be a food shortage for you tomorrow? Do you know how to protect yourself? Will you fight or will you flight? If you flight, is your passport ready? God said in His word that my people will perish due to lack of knowledge. This is free knowledge for you today. Are you going to take heed to what you're hearing, or will you ignore what is going on in the world today when it comes to a food shortage and protecting yourself? By failing to prepare today, you are preparing to fail.
Господи помилуй, смотрите, за сахар дерутся люди. Это ужас какой, Господи помилуй. Господи, война ничего.
Somalia is suffering its worst drought in 40 years. More than 500,000 people have left their homes to find food and water because their livestock have died and they're unable to grow crops. Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb has met some who've arrived at a camp for displaced people in Mogadishu.
Rukia Hussein Ahmed says when she planted her last handful of seeds on her farm, rain never came. With no food left, she started to make her way here, Somalia's capital Mogadishu, with her 4 children. Their journey began on the back of a truck. Then things got worse.
The truck driver said, "This is my last stop. You can continue on your own to Mogadishu." We sat down under a tree. My 2 babies were in bad condition because of hunger and thirst. Then, all of a sudden, I found they had white eyes. They had died. There was a lady living there who helped me to bury them by the roadside.
Rukio and her 2 surviving children are among a rapidly growing number of people who are now staying in camps like this on the outskirts of the city. Most of the people here have walked for more than a week to get here. They carried whatever they could, tarpaulins and sheets, that's what they've made their shelters out of. There are more than 1,000 people living in this settlement, and all of these shelters have sprung up within the last 4 weeks. Where they've come from, the situation's been deteriorating, and the humanitarian agencies say it's about to get much worse. Most of them have come from the southern part of Somalia, where they depended on farming and herding livestock until the last 3 rainy seasons failed. Crops withered and animals died. Here, they're surviving on 1 meal a day. Hawo Mohammed Osman was one of the first to arrive. She's a community leader. She's been trying to find help, with little success.
The situation around here is extremely difficult. People are hungry and in poor health. People don't even have shelter. Every time a car passes here, people think that somebody is coming to give them food.
It's a similar story all around the outskirts of Mogadishu. The UN says more than 60,000 people have arrived here in the last 4 months, and across the country, more than 500,000 people have been displaced by the drought. Humanitarian organisations say they only have 3% of the funds needed to help them.
The solution is for everyone to act fast. We need more fund, we need more attention to the drought, we need support from the donor agencies, from donor countries, to the Somali people. That's what we need now.
Meanwhile, Somalia's government is entangled in an ongoing and fraught electoral process. Much of the world's attention is focused on the war in Ukraine. People here have been left destitute. They're waiting and wondering if anyone will come to help.
And Malcolm joins us now live from Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. What is going to happen to these people? Who is going to come and help them, Malcolm?
Well, that's what a lot of them are asking, and it's a question that I can put to Adam O'Hersey, who's with me here. He's a member of Somalia's National Drought Response Committee. What's the government doing about this?
I could say not much, except that the Prime Minister appointed a National Drought Response Committee, of which I'm a member, a month ago. The thing is that this has been going on for so long. The droughts have been being repeated by the lack of rains for the last 3 consecutive rainy seasons. So it should have been preparedness in place, which we don't see now.
And how is this ongoing election process? At the moment, the politicians are choosing the next leaders. It's been dragging on for more than a year. How is this affecting the response to the drought?
Well, the severity of the droughts are being compounded by the tussle over who becomes the next president or the prime minister, and that in turn affects the willingness of the donors. Some of them do not know who are they dealing with, and some of them are worried that there will be a unrest premeditated by the electoral tussle between the senior government officials.
And humanitarian organisations say they have just 3% of the money that they need to help. What's going on there?
I think there is a fatigue on Somalia on the side of the international community. Elections haven't happened for a year now. The government now is on a borrowed time beyond its mandate for over 1 year now. And everybody was preparing to deal with a new government for a year now. And crisis in Ukraine and the donor fatigue and the complexity of the situation where some of the places that the droughts have affected are under the control of Al-Shabaab is mixing things up for the worse.
And the ongoing conflict between the armed group Al-Shabaab and the Western-backed government that controls the capital where we're standing, it's been going on for years. Al-Shabaab controls much of the countryside. How's that affecting the ability of the government and the humanitarian organizations to deliver help to the people that need it?
Well, Al-Shabaab do not allow any aid from the government or from the international donors that they are not managing to reach the places that they manage, the places that they control in the countryside of most of Central and South Somalia. So if the government cannot deliver or the international NGOs cannot deliver to the areas under the control of Al-Shabaab, that would cause influx of IDPs, people moving en masse from the places under the control of Al-Shabaab to the cities controlled by the government or the federal member states.
Thank you. That was Adam El-Hersi, who's a member of Somalia's National Drought Response Committee. Now, just to put this in scale, there's 500,000 or 600,000 people that have fled their homes. That's about 1/3 of Somalia's population. The next rains are due in April, but the long-term weather forecasters say they're already expecting very little or no rain to come in that rainy season. And a lot of the people in the humanitarian community here say that means we're going to see even more displacement and possibly a famine here in the months ahead. Back to you.
Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb reporting live there from Somalia's capital, Mogadishu.
Welcome to Straddled Events. On this channel, we bring you the truth. Sometimes the truth is quite ugly, unbearable, and you just don't want to deal with it. But on this channel, you're going to get it anyway. You are straddling between the fence of good versus evil, right versus wrong. And on this channel, we're going to tell you to do better. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fuli Batibo. Russia's war on Ukraine has created fears of a global food crisis. The two countries supply 1/3 of the world's wheat and are major exporters of barley, corn, and sunflower oil. Fighting has disrupted exports, and that's led to record prices on international markets. The cost of wheat is at its highest level in 14 years. Corn is at a 9-year high. Ukraine's ports stopped working when Russia began its invasion last week. This means grain stocks from both countries aren't reaching their main markets in the Middle East and Africa. Economists say consumers, particularly in lower and middle-income countries, will have to pay higher prices. Well, let's take a look at how much some countries rely on Russia and Ukraine's wheat. Many of them are already battling food shortages. Egypt is the world's biggest importer of wheat. It gets 85% of it from Russia and Ukraine. The two nations also supply war-ravaged Yemen with 40%. And Ukraine's wheat makes up around half of Lebanon's needs. The country is still recovering from the Beirut port blast in 2020 that destroyed its main grain silo.
If the situation escalates and the wheat market is halted, we have enough for about a month's worth of wheat stored in mills. But after that, we have no reserves.
With war in Ukraine and Russia, our reserves will drop, and instead of supporting our needs for the next 4 years, it will only be available for 2 or 3 months. The crisis will affect us and we will suffer from wheat shortages.
Because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, we have fears of a shortage of flour and wheat. But God willing, we will overcome these difficulties.
Unharmed but not untouched by the fighting, performers in Drohobych have new roles. Cooking meals for soldiers on the front lines.
There's a saying that when the guns sound, muses are silent. But we are not silent. We are in the rear. We are engaged in volunteer work because Ukraine is in a difficult situation now.
Since the invasion began, they've sent thousands of meatballs and dumplings, as well as meat stew, soup, fish, and pancakes, from here to Kyiv. As long as their people remain in harm's way, for this theater troupe, the show must go on. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Lviv.
This is Santiago Esquivel, a Guatemalan health worker. Today he's heading to the village of Palmilla in the east of the country. As usual, one of his big worries is that people there are not getting enough food. Years of drought, large families and few jobs have all contributed to chronic malnutrition here. In general, Guatemala has one of the highest rates in the world. A 2015 survey found that almost half the country's children were stunted for lack of food.
They look thin, underweight. You see their ribs. Their faces are thin and sometimes parts of them swell up.
But lately, things have got even worse, and not just because of the pandemic. In November, 2 massive storms hit Guatemala in quick succession, ruining crops across the country. A wall of Agustina's house was destroyed, along with her livestock.
Everything was lost. I had 35 chickens and they're all gone. Corn as well. The frost got to it.
Her daughter Josefina lost more. Her daughter's pneumonia worsened in the storms, and the floodwaters meant they couldn't get to a health centre to save her. Now she and her husband are struggling to feed the 4 children they have left.
When my husband earns some money working in the fields, we buy half a kilo of chicken for the children at least. But when we don't have money, it's just tortillas and salt, because we can't buy more.
It all helps to explain the anger felt when Guatemala's Congress passed a bill which, among other things, cut $25 million destined to fight malnutrition. The lawmakers did it even as storm waters flooded parts of the country.
This city looks like it has been hit by a bomb. The uprooted trees and damaged houses are testament to the destruction here. In February, 2 cyclones, Batirai and Imnati, hit the eastern coast of Madagascar, leaving behind millions without shelter or access to food and water. Among the victims is Gita, a 29-year-old single mother of 2. These state-run distributions provide 1 meal per day, chicken with rice and vegetables. When it comes to housing and other meals, Gita has to rely on herself.
Our home had already suffered a fire. This time it's completely destroyed. We don't have anywhere to go. I'm calling on the president to help us face this situation.
The Malagasy president visited Mananzare the day after Cyclone Batirai struck. Tens of millions of dollars of international aid have been pumped into emergency operations in the area. But out of the 5,500 households here, 1,300 are still in need of a home.
Look, that was our home. It was there. And here's where the roof collapsed. Please, madam, can you lend me a spoon so that my child can eat? You should thank her. Now my child's eating, but sometimes there's not enough food for him, and I'm forced to starve myself so that he can eat.
Gita will not eat this evening and will spend the night without a roof. There is no emergency housing left.
I go in first to prepare a bed for my children. I go through this way. I lift this up. And here's where I make the bed for them. This is where they'll sleep. Tomorrow, I'll leave early in the morning to look for a job and to look for something to feed my little ones.
The cyclone tore away the fundamental human rights to food and housing here, but the need for drinking water is even more acute. Flooding mixed clean water supplies with wastewater, a situation worsened by the widespread practice of open defecation in the region. In an attempt to prevent the spread of diseases caused by the consumption of filthy water, UNICEF is distributing purification kits and encouraging the population to abandon unhygienic habits.
If your feces are scattered in nature, they'll contaminate the canal, and they'll be eaten by the fish. Where do these fish go next? They come back to us, on our plates. If the fish eats your feces, that means you'll end up eating your own feces. Would you like that? This is why you must follow good practice. That means using toilets and disposing of children's stools there, okay?
NGOs are doing all they can to avoid an epidemic as diarrhea and typhoid cases multiply. The public hospital of Mananzari would struggle to cope with such a situation, even more so after Cyclone Batsirai tore off its roof and damaged clinical equipment and supplies. Since the disaster, women have been giving birth in emergency medical tents set up by NGOs.
I'm truly grateful to have given birth here. But what brings me down is that our house has been destroyed. And if we leave tomorrow, we'll have nowhere to live. This situation is heartbreaking.
While Mananzari has been getting the attention of NGOs, many other villages have been practically forgotten. Nusi Varika sits 115 kilometers to the north of Mananzari. Because the road is in a terrible state, damaged by the cyclones, we had to access it by boat. No NGOs are operating there. The only help comes from the state, 23 kilos of rice per household for 15 days. The distribution itself led to riots. Residents looted the stock and law enforcement fired warning shots. Marjolaine and her family haven't received any food for more than a month. Her ingenuity has kept her alive.
Sometimes I buy rice on credit and resell it to someone else with a profit margin to repay the loan. The message that I'm sending to the government is that we are hungry. 300 grams of rice costs 17 cents. Today we ate at midday, but I don't know if I will find anything to eat this evening.
The World Bank has poured $40 million into emergency programs in Madagascar. The government is working on a reconstruction plan to address infrastructural damage. International donors are waiting to see the details before sending further aid to the country. In the meantime, the climate emergency continues to put Marjolaine and hundreds of thousands of other Malagasy in peril.
In part 2 of this video, we're going to discuss ways how we can observe what's going on around the world, how we can get ourselves prepared and protect ourselves from the enemy. The enemy comes in disguises all the time. This is where we're headed for part 2. I hope you've learned something in part 1. And are you ready? Are you ready to take control of what's going on around you? Let's go to part 2.